You're hanging out after hours with Matt Anderson, presented by Inside the Gamecocks.
What is going on, Gamecock Nation? As the intro said, my name is Matt Anderson. I am the host of the Late Night Gamecock Show, and I'm your source for all things Gamecocks After Dark. Quick reminder here, just of note, this show is live on Mondays on the channel you're watching right now at 9 p.m. And then we have an additional episode that is released in podcast form. Usually Fridays mid-afternoon to evening is when that gets released. So make sure that you're staying locked in. I'm officially on Twitter now, so that's something I never thought that I would do. And if you're looking for me on Twitter, you can find me at Late Night Gamecock, and it's kind of weird. Twitter only gives you 15 characters to be able to make your little username. So it is capital L, the number 8 as an ocho. So capital L, number 8, and then it's NITE Gamecock. So Late Night Gamecock. I'll try and get the Twitter rolling. I don't do a lot of social media, so I'm having to dip my toes in and figure all this out. But a lot of fun. I actually made myself a little logo, which is really fun. I'll make sure I get that over to Phil in the near future. And good news. In talking with my wife and my mother and a couple other people, my wife and mother, two most important people in my life. They kind of told me that I need to do something about this background behind me. So hopefully Santa Claus is good to me and I have a green screen going forward and you don't have to look at the guest room bed. And that is some Gamecock stuff behind me. I don't know if you can really see it, but I do have some Gamecock stuff behind me. I got a signed basketball back there from all the legendary Gamecock basketball players. Really fun item that I have there. And maybe one day I'll get as swagged out as JC Sherbert with his wall of JC and all the fun things that he's done in his life. And then Phil has some good stuff going on. And JB always has the awesome green screen images. So, maybe in the new year, look for that. I'm excited for that. So stay on the lookout. Big news. Everybody wants to talk about the official visits this past weekend, and everybody has a lot to say about it, mainly because I think that Gamecock Nation as a whole expected to have, I'll run through these guys really quick for you. Of the official visitors that I believe were on campus this week, you had Oscar Adaway. He's a running back. You had running back Elijah Green. You had running back Rocket Sanders. Elijah Green's from North Carolina. Rocket Sanders, obviously from Arkansas. We know both of those guys well. We played against them in the past. Oscar Adaway, I believe, is from North Texas or something like that. Really good running back. You had wide receiver Jared Brown from Coastal Carolina. Wide receiver Jaden McGowan from Vanderbilt. Tight end Tyler Neville from Harvard. You had defensive lineman LT Overton from Texas A&M. His brother, Micaiah Overton as well, and defensive lineman Jerome Simmons, defensive back Gerald Kilgore, who is the brother of Jalen Kilgore, who is already a member of the Gamecock football team. So everybody that's been following Gamecock football and Gamecock athletics as a whole has kind of dominated a lot of the talk lately, with Juice Wells entering the transfer portal and Mario Anderson exiting for the transfer portal. Everybody is kind of just circling the running back room and the wide receiver room. And in this world that we live in, a lot of times it's instant gratification is what we're looking for. And I think when the floodgates didn't open with commitments, right away on Sunday or even early on Saturday, I think Gamecock Nation got kind of worried. And, my shout out here goes to Phil Mullinax, the producer of this show. And if you were, watching his show earlier today, he kind of talked about, the iceberg analogy. And I really thought that was brilliant. And I'm going to steal straight from Phil right now. But, as Gamecock fans and, folks on message boards and social media, you can really only see the tip of that iceberg that is, above the water. But underneath that iceberg is the foundation of the iceberg and everything else that goes into, the danger zone. And it's really something that Gamecock coaches, and it's not just Gamecock coaches around the country are having to wade through this, because there are ramifications if you take a transfer portal guy early. It's, do I want to set the number for this position for my team going forward in NIL? Do I want to set the number for the SEC going forward in NIL? Is this player theoretically worth what that player might be asking for? Are there, I think I saw a statistic today that there were like over 1,400 players in the transfer portal as of right now, and only 69 of them had committed as of some point today. So let that sink in. It was a real eye-opener for me. Only 69 players that have entered the transfer portal have already declared their intentions for their next school. So you might say, okay, well, Juice Wells was making X amount of dollars at South Carolina. Just go give his money to somebody else. Well, that's not always possible, because Juice Wells, while he's not getting as much money as he made, well, he's probably getting equal to greater than the money that he made through name, image, and likeness at his next school. It's actually, going up from what it was last year. And when you look at the transfer portal and you see how many kids are in it, how many wide receivers are in it, is it better for South Carolina or better for any other school around the country to say, why don't I take 33% of what Juice got and spread that over 3 wide receivers who collectively could have a larger impact than Juice Wells did at South Carolina? And the same thing goes for the running back room. Collectively, where does this money need to go? What kind of precedent am I setting for the future by putting these numbers out there? And, we'll talk about all these guys that were on official visits here in a little bit. But one of the things that I've been thinking about, and look, this is just me putting on, my hat, my business hat. And it's not really a business hat. It's just my sports hat, and seeing what's happening in the NFL right now. I mean, how long did it take for a quarterback to get a fully guaranteed contract? It took a long, long time. And now that's out of the bag, and all these NFL franchises have seen what's happened with Deshaun Watson. They're not willing to do that anymore. And at the same point, you kind of see all these running backs in the NFL kind of get blackballed and say, nope, the standard price for a running back is, for an elite running back, we're not going over $10 million a year or $12 million a year or $14 million a year. And if a running back is, has a little bit more carries on them, has an injury history, they're not, the NFL has just made a carte blanche decision across, all of their owners and all the owner meetings that this is the market for this player. And right now in college football, especially, there is no market that has been set. The market is being set right now. And I don't think we're that far away from a wink, wink, hush, hush of, look, we are not going to continue to ask our boosters to spend, $15 million a year on this recent transfer portal season. Because at some point, the boosters are going to say, I want championships, and, my 1 million, my 500,000, my part of that collective amount of money is not getting the results I want. And so therefore, nope, you don't have that money anymore. So college coaches around the country and in South Carolina are having to do the exact same thing right now. They're having to say, what is the market we're going to set? And look, this isn't coming from inside South Carolina. This is coming from my noggin right here, what I think is going on. And eventually you're going to see a market that is unattainable, and it's not going to stand the test of time. And I think that's one of the reasons you haven't seen the NCAA come in and say, hey, we're going to regulate this. This is going to get regulated on its own. Absolutely. So, with that being said, we'll dive into the official visitors here. Just give me a second. I do see that got some chat box questions and comments. Randy Johnson says most have Rocket as 100% to Carolina. He says how knows. I think he means who knows. And this might be a great jumping off point. I think the Rocket Sanders had a great visit. I was told that, from a third party source that, his official visitor host was Lenore Sellers. I think that, having Lenore's, kind of run point on there and why he's at South Carolina, why he's staying at South Carolina, what he needs to take care of him as a quarterback, as far as playmakers around him. I think that might have been a smart choice. And, I don't have that confirmed by a second source right now, but, the source I heard that from, I really believe. So, with Rocket Sanders, I heard really good things about his official visit. I heard that the players in the building really enjoyed being around him. I think that they, liked what he can bring to the table, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if Rocket Sanders eventually commits to South Carolina. I don't know of anything imminent right now as is concerned with Rocket Sanders. He's kind of the guy that has been the center of Gamecock transfer portal, social media, and message board fodder lately. If the Gamecocks can get Rocket Sanders, that's a heck of a get. And I think a lot of this hand wringing and, just fans being upset kind of gets tamed down and tampered down. But the Gamecocks have to be very, very active in this transfer portal window. So yeah, if you get a guy like Rocket Sanders, if you can get him earlier rather than later to kind of set the tone for, potentially how much you have to spend on a Rocket Sanders. And I haven't seen a number. And Wesley, I see your question here. What is a realistic NIL stock for an SEC caliber running back? Every number is different, and every number is essentially what somebody's willing to pay. I can tell you that running backs don't get as much as, the elite wide receivers. Running backs don't get as much as the elite quarterbacks. They're not going to get as much as a defensive end. I've heard rumors of numbers, not around this portal class. I want to be very clear in that, but I heard numbers in the $200,000 range for a running back in the transfer portal last year. I've heard 140,000. I've heard 60,000. I've heard a lot of different numbers, and so I don't think that a running back is breaking the bank. Yeah, Randy, those numbers that On3 puts out, I don't know how accurate they are. I think it's hard to quantify. I don't know there. I think if the Gamecocks can, secure Rocket Sanders' commitment for $97,000, I think that's a wise investment when I think about where money could be going around the entire roster. I think that, you might be able to find 3 or 4 boosters that would put in $25,000 for a Rocket Sanders. So if that's the number that's on On3, and we have to give them credit. I do think some research went into that. When I looked at it last year, I did see that Nicholas Harbor had a higher NIL value than some players ranked ahead of him. And I think that there's a premium on his ability as a track athlete. There's a premium on his ability as just a freak of nature, and his marketability, playing multiple sports. So those numbers might be right. I know that, Matt Rule over at Nebraska came out a couple of weeks ago and said, if you want a quarterback, you better be willing to pay $5 million a year. I can tell you right now that Spencer Rattler was not making $5 million a year at South Carolina. He was making a pretty penny. And, I'll just go ahead and say it. It's money that, I've never seen in my lifetime, especially at that age. But, what would have been the alternative without a Spencer Rattler the past 2 years? There are still a lot of Gamecock fans that get a lot of joy out of, just watching an elite quarterback who's going to go represent your university in the NFL, being a part of your team, and you want to win every single week, and sometimes it doesn't happen. So Mark Livingston says, do you think we have a shot at Will Shepherd? I'm sure McGowan will commit, but haven't heard much about Shepherd. Yeah, with Shepherd, I think it's up in the air if he's going to visit South Carolina. I think it'd be really, really uncommon to see a kid that doesn't make an official visit to South Carolina committing to them. But look at it. That's what Spencer Rattler did. Spencer Rattler never stepped foot at the University of South Carolina. His good buddy Austin Stogner did, and Austin had a lot of good things to say. He already had a relationship with Shane Beamer, and when Spencer had to make his decision, there wasn't a whole lot of positive publicity around Spencer. He kind of had like that stain of getting replaced by Caleb Williams. But now you look back at when he got replaced by Caleb Williams, and yeah, I think that was probably the right move. I mean, Caleb Williams is going to be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft, probably the first quarterback off the board, maybe a number 1 pick. Sometimes the kids can just play like that. But yeah, so Spencer, he committed without stepping foot on South Carolina's campus. I mean, that was kind of coming off COVID as well. So, a lot of players were taking these virtual visits. But yeah, I mean, for Will Sheppard, I think he's got to get on campus for the Gamecocks to have a real shot at him. With McGowan, I think McGowan would like to be a Gamecock. I think he wanted to be a Gamecock coming out of high school. Obviously, has ties to the state. If you read the report that Phil Kornblut put out today, and Phil's a great guy. He's part of this Chief Sports Network. Phil wrote that McGowan said that he had goosebumps playing at Williams-Brice Stadium. It was a cold, rainy, nasty day, and the stadium was still pretty packed. He's had dreams of returning a punt to Sandstorm. I think that, there's a high likelihood McGowan, eventually, is a part of South Carolina's team next year, assuming that the NIL figure is right. And that's not really bashing a kid. This is the world that we live in now. And, to have a kid that, was probably making next to nothing at Vanderbilt. There are a lot of teams that could use that kind of Swiss Army knife wide receiver, punt returner, kick returner. What is that true NIL value? I don't know. And remember, it's not, these kids are not having conversations on their official visits about dollar figures. There might be some side conversations that happen between parents and, boosters while kids are, hanging out with players on the team. Maybe some of that stuff happens, but directly, like, it wasn't like South Carolina and Shane Beamer were sitting in, really quick, McGowan is, what is his first name? I got to get it really quick. Jaden McGowan. I wanted to call him Jared. Jared Brown from Coastal. He committed to South Carolina. He was an official visitor. But yeah, Jaden McGowan's from Vanderbilt. He's kind of like a Swiss Army knife, like 5'8", 5'9", maybe 165 pounds, lightning fast, excellent return man. Kind of like in your Amarion Brown phylum, but maybe a little bit better than Amarion Brown. So back to what I was saying, I don't think that, when they had their exit interview with Shane Beamer and Shane said, well, we'd like to have you as part of the team. We have a spot for you. With Jaden McGowan, they basically said that, we made a mistake. We should have offered you out of high school. We're trying to fix that mistake. There are still side conversations that have to happen, after that. And, Shane Beamer can't be a part of those conversations. So I think that's why you saw, a wide receiver commit pop today from the transfer portal. It's why you saw a defensive tackle, Jerome Simpson, pop today. Everything kind of lined up and the player was willing to accept that offer. And right now, don't kid yourself. Every player on the roster that's a scholarship athlete is getting something through name, image, and likeness. Wesley, I see your comment here. You say, my goodness, this is basically professional sports. In a lot of ways it is. And I think it's going to become more and more like professional sports as we go on. I think that a lot of this stuff, and it might be 3 to 5 years away. I think a lot of this stuff and the dollar figures and the numbers will taper down over time. But right now, this is just the world that we live in. And, you got to be prepared to spend a little bit of money. That's just the truth of the matter on every single player. And unfortunately, in this name, image, and likeness and transfer portal era that we're in, South Carolina doesn't have the funds that other schools may or may not have. So I know South Carolina doesn't have, a $12 million, $15 million annual pool for NIL money that they can just, throw out at any given point. And you still, like, of that 12 to 15 million, let's just say, like, that's the number. I think that JC has said this numerous times, 12 to 15 million, 10 million would be, the right number for a program like South Carolina, because at South Carolina, you're still going to have to be a developmental program. You're not just going to have, even with name, image, likeness in the transfer portal, you're not going to have a team like Alabama, let's say, or Texas, or I'm trying to think, Southern Cal. I just think of these teams that have recruited really, really well and been really, really good for a long period of time. Like not just like the past 10 years, like traditionally, that have a tradition to sell in recruiting, not just the transfer portal. But think about that really quick and just say, look at these trophy cases. And we just brought in the number 15 recruiting class in the country. And wouldn't you know it, we have a gaping hole at defensive end or offensive tackle or running back because we just put this guy in the NFL. He's going to be a first rounder. You don't have to be the man here. You have to be a part of the machine, and part of this machine will get you to the NFL. That's the difference where South Carolina is. So South Carolina is never, I shouldn't say never, but probably not likely to be able to sit there and say, all right, we got 9 of 11 starters coming back on defense next year. And we can probably only upgrade at the 2 open starting positions. Like it's not South Carolina. South Carolina still has to develop the players that play for them, and they have to go be able to find the guys that might be a tick ahead of a returning starter, or 3 ticks ahead of a freshman who needs 2 more years to fill in these holes. And that's where South Carolina is going to have to be really, really active. Going through the official visitors, and I want to do that real quick. Oscar Attaway is a running back. I think he's from like North Texas. I can't remember off the top of my head. 5'10", 219 pounds. Really, really, really productive running back. A guy that would definitely help the running back room at South Carolina. I think he had a pretty daggum good visit. I wouldn't put him on commitment watch necessarily, but I wouldn't say it'd be out of the realm of a realistic situation to see him ultimately commit to South Carolina. Running back Elijah Green from North Carolina, 5'11", 210 pounds. Probably fluctuated between the running back 2 and running back 3 on North Carolina's depth chart. He has 2 years to play 2. I don't know if I see South Carolina really going all in on him, right out the gate. It's nice to have him on campus. It's nice to put, a temperature gauge on him, see what he looks like in person, not just like the game tape you might have had preparing for North Carolina this year, or even the game film that you have. And obviously they're looking at game film from this season, but never a bad idea to have a kid that's from Georgia, come to your campus. And, a lot of these guys, especially the guys that have, multiple years remaining in college, it's never a bad thing to make a relationship and a connection with them and bring them on campus for an official visit. And because, when Elijah Green, if he doesn't end up at South Carolina, ends up at his next school and he has that free transfer because he's a graduate, maybe South Carolina has a hole again and they can bring an Elijah Green in there and fill, a hole. Rocket Sanders is the big one. Originally from Rockledge, Florida. South Carolina finished number 2 in his recruitment. He was kind of a wide receiver hybrid running back type of deal when he came out of high school. 6'2", 242 pounds. He has 1 year of eligibility left. For those of you that remember, he put up 154 yards rushing against South Carolina 2 years ago. Had a first team All SEC, I think a second team All American 2 years ago. He got hit by the injury bug this year at Arkansas. Played behind a pretty horrible offensive line. No different than South Carolina players. South Carolina running backs had to run behind, and Spencer had to be protected by this year. He's a guy that I think South Carolina has a lot of staying power with. I think that he had a really good visit, and I've seen all the rumors that are on message boards right now, and everybody's saying that Rocket Sanders is a 100% lock. I can't say that right now. I think that, with these types of situations, especially coming off a visit, he had a really good visit, and maybe it's a numbers game now. And I'm not going to say it couldn't pop, tomorrow's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I think that you probably want to get him in the boat before next weekend, because that's just another opportunity for him to visit somewhere else. So I think with Rocket Sanders, if you want to go all in on him, and I think the Gamecocks should, you try and lock that down in the next 2 or 3 days. But he's very open to South Carolina. I can tell you that, and he can see himself at South Carolina. He likes South Carolina. So I would say cautiously optimistic on Rocket. So wide receiver Jared Brown from Coastal Carolina, 6 foot, 190 pounds. He has 2 years of eligibility, 2 years to play two. Really electric player. I watched some highlights of him from Coastal, and he's a guy that can get behind the defense. He's the guy that can take a little screen pass and go 52 yards. He's an upgrade over what South Carolina had last year in the receiver room, and he was a big get for South Carolina today. He's a guy that, everybody was all about Eddie Lewis coming from Memphis. Jared Brown's probably a little bit better than Eddie Lewis, maybe a lot better than Eddie Lewis coming out of Coastal Carolina. We talked about wide receiver Jaden McGowan, 5'8", 181 pounds from Vanderbilt, 2 years to play two. He's a guy that I would have thought would have committed to South Carolina shortly after his visit or on his visit this past weekend. I can't tell you what's stopping him from pulling the trigger. I don't know. I don't think it's a South Carolina thing. I think it's a Jaden McGowan thing. I know that Jaden McGowan wants to take a trip to Boston College. So that's out there right now. And it might be a thing where he goes to Boston College and you just go from there. I mean, Boston College, especially Boston on, the second or third week in December is a lot different than South Carolina. And, playing in the ACC is a lot different than the SEC. And Jaden McGowan knows that firsthand. Tight end Tyler Neville from Harvard. He has 1 year left to play. You're going to see this a lot from the Ivy League kids, but Tyler Neville is 6'4", 235 pounds. He's an Ivy League kid from Harvard. It's important to remember that these Ivy League kids, oftentimes they don't have a graduate school to go to necessarily. So these kids are able to go into the transfer portal before other players. I know that Tyler Neville is a guy that South Carolina desperately wants. They need to fill out that tight end room. I think that you're going to see, blanking on his name right now. Who was everyone's favorite tight end? Someone help me in the chat box this year. He did it. He played behind Trey Knox. And I don't know why I'm blanking on his name in the moment, but yep, Phil's got me. Phil always has me. Joshua Simon. Joshua Simon's going to come back. I feel pretty strongly about that. And then you have the freshman tight end coming in, but you still need bodies. I mean, you have Reed and you have Nick, and those guys are going to be pretty decent, in time. But they're more blocking guys. And Tyler Neville can do a little bit of both. He's a hard-nosed player. I think he'd be a big get for South Carolina. The next two we have to talk about are two defensive linemen, the Overton brothers from Texas A&M. The headliner is LT Overton, 6'5", 265 pounds, former 5-star, has 2 years left to play two. And then his brother, Micaiah Overton, 6'4", 300 pounds, has 1 year to play one. I am still not 100% certain that Micaiah was in on an official visit this weekend. I know that LT Overton was in on an official visit. I know that they had a good visit. I think that they are a package deal wherever they end up. And I can't say for certain that the Gamecocks are going to be willing to pay the Overton's numbers. There are some concerns about LT Overton, but I just don't know. I think that he's going to have the Alabamas, the LSUs, the Texases, the Southern Cals, these people that view him as a luxury as opposed to a need. And they might be able to outspend South Carolina. And, when you have to factor in, it's two players. And, Micaiah could probably help. He's a big kid, 6'4", 300 pounds. We all saw South Carolina go to that 3-3-5 defense. He's a guy that you maybe plug in and take some snaps there. LT Overton has gained some weight. He's probably more of a defensive tackle, defensive end flex guy right now. I just wouldn't say that I'm optimistic about either of them ending up at South Carolina, but with Micaiah and me not being certain that he was an official visitor this past weekend, maybe they're they're leaving an official visit for Micaiah to come back, and then LT comes with his family, and they make a second run at them. If that's the case, I think it's a really, really smart move by South Carolina there. Defensive lineman, this is a JUCO kid. He's got 2 years to play two. Jerome Simmons, he's defensive tackle all the way, 6'4", 333 pounds, from Bamberg, South Carolina originally. And he is a kid that, you'll wish you could get in for spring practice, but he's a 4-star JUCO kid. So he's gonna boost the Gamecocks recruiting numbers for those of you that like to see high number or low numbers by Gamecock recruiting team rankings. He's a guy that is going to have to play next year. He's going to be a plug and play guy, especially with only 2 years to play remaining. Big pickup for South Carolina. You can't get enough defensive linemen, especially defensive tackles. And we all know where South Carolina has been lately when it comes to defensive tackles, either developing or staying with the program for 4 years. So big get. I think that it was a big need, an absolute humongous need. The last kid that took an official visit this past weekend is defensive back Gerald. I think it's Gerald Kilgore. This is Jalen's brother. He has 3 years to play 3. He's a kid that I think can play at the Power 5 level. If nothing else, he'll help out on special teams, but I think that he could crack the 2 deep in his time at South Carolina. He's going to take, I think, an official visit to Auburn. I thought he was another kid that was going to jump on the offer. I know that Jalen's really, really happy at South Carolina, and they're just making sure that it's the right place for both brothers. They're not scared to go separate ways. They've already kind of done that with Jalen playing at South Carolina and his brother Gerald playing at Tennessee Tech. Great family. I don't think they're playing any recruiting games or NIL games or anything like that. This is really just the family trying to find the right spot for Gerald. And I think it's probably going to be South Carolina when it's all said and done. I think that, that just makes the most sense. One note about Gerald and Jalen did the same thing. Their father is a pastor, and they both left their official visit in time to get home for church on Sunday. Jalen, when he took his official visit, and Gerald did the same. So always want to bring high quality, high character kids into the program. And I think that every single player we've talked about so far fits that mold. Taking a transfer sometimes can be hit or miss because you don't know that kid. You basically had 2 weeks, maybe a week to get to know them before you take them on in your program. And all these kids we're talking about, I think, are really, really good kids. I think they're kids that, will buy into the love your brother mindset that Shane has. And culture is a big thing. And I know that a lot of people say, well, how can we have culture when 18 players are transferring out? Well, a lot of those kids are taking better opportunities for themselves, not from an NIL standpoint, but dropping down a level of competition to be able to get on the field. The SEC is a really, really hard place to play football. And if you didn't hear it, the Friday before the South Carolina Clemson football game, JB, JC, and Phil had Wesley Saunders on the show. Wesley is one of my good buddies from way back in college, and he talked about, these kids might have more talent than other kids. They might have more ability, but, once you lose your confidence, you got nothing at the SEC level, and you got nothing in college football, and you might have to drop down a level to regain that. And I think that's what's happening with a lot of these kids that, are making that move down. It's probably in their best interest, and it's 100% the best interest of South Carolina because there is no scholarship limit anymore. You can sign as many kids as you want. You just got to be under 85 scholarship kids by August. And remember, there are 1,400 players in the transfer portal right now, and a large majority of those players are coming from programs that didn't make a bowl game. There's going to be another wave of transfers, and we don't know. Like, we as Gamecock fans, as people that support the program, we don't know everything that's being said behind closed doors with other players, from maybe a Georgia, maybe a Tennessee, maybe a pick your school that's playing in a bowl game. There are back channel conversations that are happening right now. And you can't just load up on all these guys. I think South Carolina can only take somewhere in the range of like 10 to 15 additional players, even with the transfers out of the program, between the recruiting class and the transfer portal. So the Gamecocks are going to have to be very selective. They're going to have to be selective on who they take to make sure they can make an impact, but also, selective on when you take somebody. And, keep an eye out for any player that visited a school last weekend that doesn't commit to that school this weekend. There is a lot of moving parts that have to happen just on the kids' side. Forget what's my NIL number or, am I getting paid? It's Christmas is coming up. They're going to want to spend time with their family. They have to move out of their old apartment, dorm, condo, house, wherever they're living right now. They got to move all that stuff across the country or across a couple state lines. And they have to get eligible for South Carolina. Some of these kids that might come in for an official visit, they got to do paperwork to get enrolled. South Carolina has to do their due diligence to make sure if they take this kid, they can get into school. Because the last thing you want is a kid that, might not be able to come in at spring practice. So you drag out till summer, and then all of a sudden we can't get the kid in school. There's nobody left on the transfer portal that's worth it for us to take. And you just lost a scholarship because you did that. So you have to be very, very meticulous in, what you're doing. And a lot of times, we talk about the salaries that coaches make and, is it justified or not? But these coaches and the director of operations and the DOps team and the analysts and the support staff, they are working 100 to 120 hours a week right now just to make sure that they dot every I, cross every T. Don't let anything slip through the cracks when they're making these decisions, because, it's almost like cramming for a final where you didn't go to class all semester, because it takes a heck of a lot of time to go get all this film on Oscar Attaway and say, okay, well, 2 years to play two if the NCAA approves a medical hardship waiver due to an ACL injury in 2021. All right, is his ACL good? Is it intact? I mean, we saw all that with the Chaney kid from Miami. He was probably going to be a Gamecock. He wanted to be a Gamecock, but there were too many medical red flags, and you have to make those decisions fast. And you don't have the time where you can, get a kid into camp. You can watch some practice, spring practice, fall practice. You can watch their high school film. You can talk to their teachers. You can talk to their coaches. You can talk to their AD, talk to the guidance counselor, talk to, anyone and everyone that helps you make an informed decision on taking a kid or not. You have to really do your due diligence, and that's what the Gamecocks are doing right now. So with that being said, keep an eye on it. I'm going to the Big Spur right now just to make sure that I don't miss anything. I don't think I've missed any, welcome homes. I think that the welcome homes that I know about so far are the kids that we talked about, Jerome Simpson and Jared Brown. Oh, thanks, Sean. Really appreciate that. That makes this thing so much more fun for me when people say nice things like that. I really appreciate it. Really quick around college basketball, I was going to get into college basketball, but I want to spend more time on this. Right now, I will say that, everyone's wondering about college basketball. Everyone's really excited for college basketball, and college basketball is something that it really is my passion. I've been doing this stuff for, well before I started working with the Big Spur and started doing this show. I always try to predict bracketology. I have a pretty firm handle on teams that'll get in. Most years, and it's getting easier. Like, I'm not saying I'm some like savant, but it's getting easier because you see the criteria and you see what teams get in, what teams don't. So most years I'm usually 67, 66, 68, of the 68 teams that make the NCAA tournament. And so I did want to spend some time right now, and then we'll talk about this more. I'm sure when I go on Phil and JB and JC's show later this week, we haven't firmly put that time slot in. Usually it's Wednesdays, but we'll probably have a deeper conversation on that show. But what the selection committee is looking at is it's not just your overall record. Right now South Carolina sits at 8-1. They're 4-0 at home. They're 1-1 on the road, and they're 3-0 in neutral games. Haven't played a conference game yet. South Carolina's 8-2 in their last 10. They've won 5 in a row at home, one in a row on the road. And right now, the net rankings, and this is a big thing that people sometimes miss. The net ranking does not mean that you are, if you have, let's say right now, the Gamecocks have a 28 net rating. That doesn't necessarily mean that the selection committee views you as the 28th best team in the country. I can go through it right now, and there are teams like, I think, like Duke, North Carolina, Kentucky, Ole Miss is undefeated. All of those teams are below South Carolina in the net. What the net is used as is a sorting tool. So they've sorted this, and you have quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. And so that's what they're looking at when they do this. And the quads are set up where, if you beat a team at home that has a net rating of 1 to 30, then you get a quad 1 game, whether you win or lose. You either get, you're 1-1, or you're 1-0, or you're 0-1 if you've only played one of those. And then quad 1 goes, I think, teams ranked in the net 1 to 75 on a neutral court. And you get a win-loss, same type of deal. And anybody over 75 on a neutral, you have quad 3 and quad 4. So what the Gamecocks need to avoid is quad 3 and quad 4 losses. I did some quick math on this, and right now, KenPom has South Carolina projected to go, I believe, 20-11 and 9-9 in the SEC. And if you look at the KenPom page, you'll kind of see this. If you actually count it up, his win-loss predictions say 8-10 for South Carolina in the SEC. But if you look at the bottom, he predicts them to go 9-9. That's just because some games literally are such a coin flip that he's saying South Carolina could win or lose, plus or minus. You could have 7, you go 7-11, you could go 9-9. So if you count it up, he has 8 SEC wins. And in 2023, there were 2 teams that made the NCAA tournament out of the SEC that were 8-10 in conference. That was Arkansas, who got in as an 8 seed, and Mississippi State, who got in as an 11 seed. Now, if you look at the KenPom ratings, Arkansas was ranked as the 22nd best team in the country, and Mississippi State was ranked as the 53rd. If you go back to 2022, no team from the SEC made the NCAA tournament with an 8-10 conference record. Mississippi State had a ranking of 49th on KenPom, and they were left out of the tournament. In 2021, there was no NCAA tournament due to COVID. And in 2020, Bama had an 8-10 record in the SEC. They were ranked 60th in KenPom, and they got left out. So, as we look at it right now, 8-10, 9-9 puts the Gamecocks firmly on the bubble. And that's where KenPom has them right now. Now, the good thing is what I just talked about when you look at this as a sorting tool is right now KenPom has the Gamecocks projected to go 3-7 in quad 1 games, 3-3 in quad 2 games. So a combined record of 6-10. And then in quad 3 games, KenPom has the Gamecocks going 3-1, and in quad 4 games, 10-0. So combined quad 3 and quad 4, 13-1 record. One quad 3 loss isn't going to kill you. Now, you probably want closer to a 500 record in Q1 and Q2 games to feel really good about your chances. So, when you look at KenPom, like a lot of these games that, might be a quad 1 or a quad 2 game, specifically the quad 2 games, he might have the Gamecocks losing by 3 points. Now, that could swing the other way. I mean, that's such a tight margin that, the Gamecocks could sneak out 2 more wins out of there and finish at 8-8 in quad 1 and quad 2. If the Gamecocks do that, they're looking at a pretty good, 10-8 SEC record combined with a 12-1 non-conference. So that puts the Gamecocks at 22 wins. They'd probably be in the field. But don't get hung up on 20 wins to get you in. That's just not the way it works anymore. It has to be the right combination of wins. And the best way I can explain that is a couple of years ago, I can't remember which team it was, but they had it was a non-Power 5 team, I believe. But they had like a 25-4 record or something and did not win their conference tournament. And everybody was in an uproar because they didn't get in. But if you look at it, of their 29 games, 25 of them were against quad 3 and quad 4 opponents. They had 2 quad 4 losses. So like their wins were just fluffed up. It wasn't necessarily, they were beating quality teams. That's the benefit that the Gamecocks have. From here on out, assuming that they take care of business and looking at it right now, South Carolina is ranked 52nd on KenPom, 76th on Bart Torvik, and 65th on Evan Mia. Torvik started the Gamecocks at 111. KenPom started the Gamecocks at 66. So they're in a good projection because both of those data points. Well, I don't think Torvik does, but KenPom definitely uses the last 4 or 5 years of historical data. So just want to say that we'll talk more about this on JB, JC, and Phil's show, later this week. But right now, the Gamecocks don't have another home basketball game at all until they play Charleston Southern on Saturday. So this is going to be football talk. I'm sure that JB and Phil spend a lot of time talking about college basketball. So if you want a college basketball fix, you can go there. They don't spend all 15 hours a week on it, but you'll probably get a good hour of basketball content. But right now, like Sean said, it's football these days. That's what everybody wants to talk about. So we'll talk about that. But I did want to give a little bit of a synopsis of how what the Gamecocks road looks like in college basketball. And don't forget, I saw South Carolina put out a statement today on Instagram or social media that all home men's and women's basketball games, the rest of the December calendar, it's free concessions. So I think it's free hot dogs, it's free popcorn, free soda fountain drinks, and bottles of water. So if you're looking for a reason to go to the game and get out there and support the Gamecocks, I know their next 2 opponents. And on the basketball side of things, let's see, 2024 Gamecocks. You have 4 more games at home. So you got Charleston Southern, Winthrop, Elon, and Florida A&M. So get out there and support the Gamecocks. Hopefully they have a 12-1 record going into conference play. And that would probably mean that Saturday, January 6th at home against Mississippi State would be a sellout for men's basketball. And that's fantastic. Men's basketball needs all the support they can get. But yep, it is football time right now. And we'll get back to regularly scheduled football content on Thursday night's show. Again, if you want to go follow me on Twitter, I mentioned at the beginning, I'm dipping my toes into social media. It's Late Night Gamecock is the username, and it's capital L, the number 8, and then it's night spelled NITE Gamecock. So it's username is at Late Night Gamecock. You can find me there. You can always reach out to me via email at latenightgamecockshow@gmail.com. And I'm always on the Big Spur. If you're a member there, feel free to send me a private message. Ask me any questions on the board. I'm always here for you guys. I really, really appreciate it. This means the world to me to be able to do this. And all of y'all give me such a valuable thing, which is your time. It's the most valuable thing we have on this planet. And I don't take it for granted at all. So thank y'all so much. And until next time, I am signing off. Have a good one, guys.